Kia ora. Today I've got a quick video for you on how I add weathering and chips and scratches and bullet holes and all that kind of fun stuff to any kind of armor. So when you're painting your army or any kind of squad and you get to that point when you're thinking, these are looking great, I'm really happy with these, anything else would be too much. Well, have I got something for you. Have you ever thought about battle damage, chips and scratches and all kinds of wear and tear? Because it's a great way to take that little miniature that you thought was pretty much done and make it even more done. It looks really cool, it's really easy. All those little scratches and nicks and bullet holes that you can add tell a really cool story about your miniature. And as you know, here at Sloane Ranger Studio, we're all about telling stories with our miniatures, and nothing tells a better story than a space marine who's clearly been on the battlefield for a little bit too long. So it's really easy to do, only a couple of steps, and you can do it with any color that you want. All you gotta have is the color that you're using, a little bit of white, a little bit of brown. So let's get started. Cool, so here I've got this awesome ironclad dreadnought, I think that's what it's called, painted up in my Imperial Fists scheme, because I've got a whole lot of these being worked on at the moment, so I figured I'll whip one of these out and use it as an example. It's a nice, good surface to demonstrate these kind of chips. You can get some good shapes and some good variation on a big surface like this. It's a little bit easier to show off than something smaller like this. The technique doesn't change in any way, it's just a bigger thing to show it off. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with our kind of primary color, and in this case it's yellow, so I'm going to be using this color here, Flash Gets Yellow, and I'm going to be combining it with a little bit of white. The reason for this is because this kind of looks like we've peeled off our main color and we've gone down into the primer underneath. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of 50-50 white and yellow and create a pale yellow, the similar kind of yellow we would be using to do these edge highlights here. And that'll be our basis for our first lot of chips and scratches. So let me just mix that up. Alright, so we've got this pale yellow mixed up here. If you're using Citadel colors, you can always just use Dawn Yellow. I think that's about the color that I would normally use. But again, this principle applies to any color you're using. That yellow could be blue, it could be red. Doesn't matter, just add in a little bit of white to get a primer looking color, which is that color that would go underneath that main color that they're using. So we've got this pale yellow here. What we're going to do is think like bullets and think like scuffs and try and imagine where these wear and tear would be. So primary places would be like these edges. I'm just going to add some little kind of scratches and little nicks along these edges here, particularly around corners, things that would see the most amount of wear, as they kind of brush past bits of debris or terrain, or maybe it's in transit being packaged up or shipped out and whatever it happens to be. But yeah, all along these kind of edges we're going to add some little nicks, and we're just being as random as our brain will let us. I know it's quite a hard thing to force sometimes, is being random, but just trying to be as random as possible and add some nicks and scratches along these edges, and you can sort of see that it starts looking pretty beat up already. So I'm going to do that across the rest of this arm and get back to you in a second. Cool. So now that our edges are nicely scuffed up, we can now move on to doing some other kind of marks. And so another quick one that you can do is little scratches, as if little things have brushed past it. Again, maybe not quite as heavy, maybe little bits of fence or something like that, but a thin bit of paint on the very tip of your brush. You can always take off the excess just on your thumb like I do, and then just very light little scratches and just changing up the direction as sort of often as you can do it, and just work your way around, adding tiny little scratches. Doing the odd cross always looks really cool. Alright, Alright, so we got quite a lot of scratches going on there, and at the moment it's looking like we've created a pattern with the scratches, which isn't exactly what we want. And so what we're going to do now is break those scratches up with some heavier things, and so maybe these are bullet grazes or big dents or big chips. And so getting a little bit more paint on the edge of our brush, what we're going to do is we're just going to come in and add some big chips like so. And being random again, just start with like little cross stitches, kind of doing little things like this, but obviously at a much smaller scale. So just kind of adding, again, being random, not trying to be too uniform with where you put these. They could come from any direction or anywhere, and just adding in some heavier marks. Alright, so we've got some bigger chips going on now. Next thing we're going to do is going to be even more brave and add on some big grazes or big scratches. Maybe this is from like a blast or something like that. And so what we're going to do is maybe along this claw here where it plunges into other bits of debris and machinery, there's going to be some big explosions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag in some big scuff marks like this. And this is a big brave step. Alright, so now we've built up that foundation of chips and scratches and markings and big old burn marks and scorches and grazes and all that kind of thing. It looks like some weird sort of like custard color at the moment, but next thing we're going to do is look like it's peeled back to exposed metal. So we add on some brown. Just going to take a little bit on our brush, make sure we've got a very fine tip here, so I just take off any excess on my finger there, keeping it nice and steady. And where we've added all these marks, we're going to come in, add in our brown, and that looks like it's come off, ripped off the paint and gone down to the bare metal. And so that's what it looks like on a big scratch. And then around all of these kind of little edges, I'm just going to add some little grazes just along the edge there. Being random, this isn't an edge highlight per se, it's along an edge, but we're being as random as we can, like kind of big old mark there, a gap, and this kind of randomness is what makes it look so believable. Where we've got all of these little scratches, you can pick out the odd one by placing a brown mark just above it. And that looks like it's a scratch that's scored a little bit deeper than the rest. Anyway, you can sort of see how it's coming together now. I'm going to go around and add these brown marks into the space in between all of these yellow areas. You always want to leave a little bit of the yellow around the outside of your brown. It looks like it's kind of worn down a layer or two of paint. So I'm going to go around, add this chipping and weathering all over, and we'll see how it looks when we're done. Alright, so we are all done with our darker chips there. You can see how it really contrasts nicely with our yellow, and so if you've got a darker color, say a black armored miniature, and you want to do this process, you can see why adding the lighter color before going down to the brown kind of helps build up that contrast and kind of give it a different kind of color or a different area to work with. But on this yellow, it's the perfect kind of canvas for showing this technique off, because that brown contrasts so nicely with the yellow. But you can see how we've built up this really worn out arm, and so this guy has been He's been in all sorts of battles for a very long time. There's lots of bullet marks, there's lots of blast marks, and you can see how it wears down on these edges and corners where things obviously get caught a lot more than on these flat surfaces. But we've got these big gouge marks here, and so at the moment it just kind of looks like a bit of a flat brown. So to add a little bit more color and a little bit more depth to maybe that rusted metal underneath, I'm just going to pull out a little bit of Mournfang brown, and so this is just a lighter, bit more orange brown. Goes nicely with our color scheme, and all we're going to do, thin it down a little bit on the very edge of our brush, and just kind of stipple in some of this lighter brown to this dark area here, and it's just going to add the ever so slight bit of variation in that brown and look like it's a little bit more rusty. It's nothing too major, but it just adds a little bit of something to it. You can take this a little step further as well if you want, and maybe get a little bit of a bright steel color and add some fresh scratches, but I'm quite happy with the look of this this old metal underneath. I think it looks really great. But yeah, that's the technique. There's nothing too fancy about it. Anybody can do it. It doesn't require any fancy blending or anything like that. Just a very fine tip on your brush and a little bit of patience. I hope you like it. If you like this content, of course, like and subscribe, and let me know your feedback in the comments. I'm always looking to improve the channel and the content that I produce. But I hope you like it. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.